Nebraska, Rutgers 17, Nebraska 27, Nebraska 3, Rutgers 0, Nebraska 463, Nebraska 11, Penn State 1, Nebraska 1, Nebraska 3, Michigan State 0, Minnesota 0, Nebraska 3, Nebraska 28, Illinois 6, Ida All-American Championships, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Colorado State, Nebraska, Michigan, Omaha, Nebraska, Michigan State, Nebraska, Maryland, Nebraska Scarlet vs. Cream Intra-Squad, Nebraska, Iowa, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Rutgers, Nebraska, Bayou City Collegiate Classic, Nebraska, Bellevue University, Nebraska, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Purdue, Nebraska, Northern Iowa, Ohio State, Nebraska, West Virginia, Nebraska, Purdue, Nebraska, Indiana, Nebraska, Iowa, Ida Central Regional Championships, Nebraska, Northwestern, Northwestern, Army West Point, Nebraska, Iowa State, Nebraska, Illinois, Nebraska, Quail Valley Collegiate Invitational, Nebraska, Minnesota, Nebraska Coaches Clinic Intra-Squad Wrestle-Offs, Nebraska, Michigan State, Nebraska, Purdue, Nebraska Big Ten Tournament Quarterfinals, Nebraska, Memphis, Nebraska, Michigan Big Ten Tournament Semifinals, Nebraska, Arkansas, Purdue, Nebraska, Northwestern, Nebraska, Harold Nichols Cyclone Open, Nebraska, Kansas, Indiana, Nebraska Big Ten Tournament Finals, Nebraska, Warren Williamson Electronics Open, Minnesota State, Mankato, Nebraska, Northwood, Michigan, Nebraska, Maryland, Minnesota Invitational Diving Only, Nebraska, Eastern Illinois, Nebraska, Minnesota Big Ten Dual Meet Challenge, Nebraska, Southern Illinois, Edwardsville, Nebraska, Rutgers, North Texas, Nebraska, UMKC, Nebraska, St. John's, Arkansas, Nebraska, Ohio State, Nebraska, Wyoming, Nebraska, Penn State, Nebraska, Kentucky, Air Force, Ohio State NCAA Championships, Nebraska, Maryland, North Dakota, Nebraska, Creighton, Nebraska, Northwestern, UCF, Nebraska.